Hey everyone, Elena here. My sister used my name to take out loans behind my back, so I let the bank come for her instead. The Heart's Eyes brings you stories that prove patience can be more powerful than anger. If you're here for real-life twists that leave people speechless, make sure you're subscribed. Let's begin the story, and don't forget to press the bell icon. The day I found out, my world stopped for a moment. I had always trusted my sister, shared everything with her, even the smallest details of my finances. But that trust shattered when I checked my credit report and saw dozens of loans in my name. Loans I never signed for, loans I never agreed to. My sister had taken advantage of our bond, used my identity behind my back, and racked up thousands of dollars in debt that I would be legally responsible for. I felt a mix of betrayal, anger, and disbelief. All the late-night conversations, all the shared secrets had been weaponized against me. And yet, the solution wasn't confrontation, at least not the kind that would let her get away with it. I decided to take action, one that would finally make her face the consequences of her choices. My sister used my name to take out loans behind my back, so I let the bank come for her instead. I had always considered my sister Lauren trustworthy. Growing up, we shared everything: clothes, secrets, late-night talks, but finances had always been off-limits. I managed my own money carefully, juggling bills, savings, and investments. I never imagined she would cross the line in such a dramatic and destructive way. It started with a routine credit check. I was preparing to apply for a small loan to renovate my apartment when I noticed something alarming. My credit score had plummeted. Digging deeper, I discovered multiple loans taken out in my name, loans I never applied for, loans I never agreed to. My sister had taken advantage of our bond, used my identity behind my back, and racked up thousands of dollars in debt that I would be legally responsible for. I felt a mix of betrayal, anger, and disbelief. All the late-night conversations, all the shared secrets had been weaponized against me. And yet, the solution wasn't confrontation, at least not the kind that would let her get away with it. I decided to take action, one that would finally make her face the consequences of her choices. I had always considered my sister Lauren trustworthy. Growing up, we shared everything: clothes, secrets, late-night talks, but finances had always been off-limits. I managed my own money carefully, juggling bills, savings, and investments. I never imagined she would cross the line in such a dramatic and destructive way. It started with a routine credit check. I was preparing to apply for a small loan to renovate my apartment when I noticed something alarming. My credit score had plummeted. Digging deeper, I discovered multiple loans taken out in my name, loans I never applied for, loans I never agreed to. My sister had taken advantage of our bond, used my identity behind my back, and racked up thousands of dollars in debt that I would be legally responsible for. I felt a mix of betrayal, anger, and disbelief. All the late-night conversations, all the shared secrets had been weaponized against me. And yet, the solution wasn't confrontation, at least not the kind that would let her get away with it. I decided to take action, one that would finally make her face the consequences of her choices. I spent the next few hours gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Emails, text messages, and loan documents all pointed to one undeniable fact: Lauren had knowingly used my identity to secure these loans. Every number, every signature, every application was a deliberate act. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, not just financially, but personally. How could someone I trusted so completely manipulate me like this? I debated confronting her directly. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, to see her squirm under the weight of her own lies. But another part knew anger alone wouldn't protect me or restore my credit. I needed leverage, a plan that would force her accountability. I couldn't let her slip away with my identity and my hard-earned financial reputation. I called the bank immediately, explaining the situation and asking about the best way to proceed. They confirmed my fears. I could be held liable for the debt if I didn't act fast. That was the wake-up call. I realized that if I went through the proper channels, the banks themselves could hold her accountable in a way I couldn't personally. I had to step back, let the process unfold, and ensure she faced real consequences. As I sat down to plan the next steps, a mixture of anger, determination, and relief settled over me. This wasn't just about recovering money, it was about teaching a hard lesson on trust, responsibility, and the consequences of betrayal. My decision was clear. I would let the banks come for her, and she would finally see the gravity of her actions. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of urgency. I couldn't let Lauren's actions go unchallenged, and I couldn't risk my credit being ruined. I called the bank's fraud department first thing, explaining the situation in detail. They took my claims seriously, assigning a case number and advising me on steps to protect myself. I froze the accounts, submitted identity theft reports, and ensured no further loans could be opened in my name. Every move was calculated, designed to protect my financial stability while building a case against her. Meanwhile, Lauren acted as if nothing had happened. She continued her usual routine, texting casually, asking to borrow small amounts of money, pretending that life was normal. It infuriated me. She was living in denial while my credit and reputation were at risk. I began documenting every interaction, every conversation, every suspicious behavior, every message. Every denial she made became evidence, a record of her unwillingness to admit wrongdoing. I started confronting her indirectly. I stopped giving her money, canceled any joint accounts, and changed passwords on shared financial apps. Her agitation turned to frustration. She demanded explanations, claiming she didn't know what I was talking about. But the documentation was undeniable. I stayed calm, letting her agitation rise, while I kept my focus on legal and financial measures. Even our family dynamic shifted. Mutual friends began noticing the strain. Conversations with my parents were awkward. They tried mediating, but quickly realized that I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about revenge, it was about responsibility. And for the first time, Lauren had to realize that actions have consequences. The rising conflict wasn't just between us, it was between her entitlement and the accountability she had been avoiding. Lauren's denials and manipulations escalated. She started contacting mutual friends, trying to portray herself as a victim of family drama, and claiming I was overreacting. It was infuriating to see her spin the story when the evidence was stacked against her. I knew I had to remain meticulous and not let her deflect or distract me from protecting myself. Every email, every text, every loan document became crucial in building a solid case. The banks began sending notices, letters demanding repayment, notices of default, and warnings about potential legal action. I watched Lauren read them, her confident facade cracking for the first time. She called me repeatedly, panic rising in her voice, demanding I fix everything. I remained calm, answering only with facts. I had reported the fraud, frozen the accounts, and submitted all necessary documentation. Her reliance on me had been shattered, and I could see the fear of real consequences setting in. Our parents got involved next, trying to mediate and protect her, but I refused to allow interference. I explained clearly that this was not about punishing her emotionally, it was about holding her accountable. They argued, pleading with me to just give her a break, but I stood firm. They were finally seeing the pattern I had endured for years: her entitlement, her lack of respect for boundaries, and her willingness to jeopardize others for her own gain. Even in the workplace, I felt the tension. I was distracted, constantly checking updates from the bank, making calls, and preparing documents to ensure my financial safety. The stress weighed heavily, but I knew that letting it slide would only empower her further. Every missed payment, every letter she received added pressure. It was a battle between responsibility and denial, and I refused to surrender. The conflict had escalated to a point where the only way forward was to let the system enforce accountability. The final stretch of the rising conflict was the most intense. Lauren's panic had fully set in. Calls from the bank became frequent, each one another reminder of the gravity of her actions. She realized that I wasn't going to bail her out, and that hit her hard. For the first time, she faced the consequences of using my identity without permission. The fear in her voice during calls and messages was a mixture of anger, frustration, and disbelief. She hadn't expected accountability to feel so real. She attempted last-minute negotiations, begging me to intervene, promising to make it right if I would just step in. But I had learned that enabling her would undo the lesson entirely. I calmly refused every plea, knowing that letting the banks act would be the only way she truly understood responsibility. Every letter she received, every late fee, every threat of legal action drove the point home. Her choices had consequences beyond words or apologies. Even among friends and family, her reputation began to shift. People who had once defended her started noticing patterns of manipulation and deceit. Meanwhile, I remained composed, documenting everything meticulously, reinforcing the evidence that would protect me fully from financial liability. The rising conflict reached its peak tension when a formal notice arrived, directly in her name, making clear she alone was liable for repayment. She had crossed a line, and now she had to own it entirely. The stage was set for the turning point, the moment where consequences met accountability, and I could finally move from reactive frustration to decisive resolution. Lauren could no longer hide behind denial, and I had finally ensured the lesson would stick. The moment of real change came when Lauren received the first official communication from the bank. It wasn't a friendly reminder or a casual notice. It was a demand for repayment, outlining the loans she had fraudulently taken in my name. Her confidence vanished instantly. For weeks, she had assumed I would cover her mistakes, that I would quietly handle the fallout so she could avoid consequences. But now, there was no escape. I watched her read the letter, her eyes widening, her hands shaking slightly. I didn't say a word. There was no satisfaction in gloating. This wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. She had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored, and she had to feel the weight of her actions. The quiet tension in the room was palpable. She realized that every step she had taken to exploit my trust had led her here, to a reality where she alone was responsible. Then came the first phone call from the bank directly to her. Hearing her voice trembling as she answered questions about the loans confirmed the shift. This was no longer a hypothetical scenario. The legal and financial consequences were real, immediate, and unavoidable. For the first time, I saw fear, regret, and a flicker of understanding in her expressions. She began to comprehend the full scope of her choices. I maintained my composure throughout, providing no shortcuts, no apologies, no rescue. The turning point wasn't a single event. It was the cumulative effect of her facing the reality she had created. Each notice, each phone call, each required signature pushed her closer to recognition. Actions have consequences, and trust, once broken, cannot be easily restored. This was the start of her reckoning and the start of a fundamental change in how she approached responsibility, respect, and honesty. Over the next few days, Lauren's behavior shifted from panic to desperation. She reached out repeatedly, pleading for advice, explanations, and even sympathy. She tried to rationalize her actions, claiming that she didn't understand the consequences or that I should have warned her about how serious financial obligations could be. But I didn't respond with indulgence. I remained calm, focused, and firm. This was no longer about family arguments or emotional manipulation. It was about real-world accountability, and she had to learn it the hard way. Every notice from the bank arrived like a countdown. Late fees, warnings of legal action, and potential credit damage built pressure she could no longer ignore. I watched silently as her panic became tangible, her usual arrogance replaced by fear. For the first time, she realized the gravity of using someone else's identity. It wasn't a harmless mistake, it was fraud, and it carried consequences that no amount of pleading could undo. I began guiding her subtly, not to rescue her, but to ensure she didn't make matters worse. I reminded her to respond to the bank, provide accurate information, and cooperate fully. Every correct action she took reinforced the lesson she had ignored for too long. Actions have consequences, and trust, once broken, must be earned back. Family and friends started noticing the change too. Conversations with mutual acquaintances revealed that she was explaining herself in ways that hinted at accountability, rather than deflecting blame as before. Slowly, she began to grasp the full scale of her actions and the importance of restitution. The turning point was solidifying. She could either face the consequences and learn, or continue to flounder and suffer. The final moments of the turning point arrived when Lauren received the official demand for repayment, now accompanied by a notice of potential legal action if she failed to respond. Her panic was visible, her hands shook, her voice wavered, and the confident facade she had maintained for so long crumbled entirely. This was no longer a theoretical consequence, it was real, tangible, and unavoidable. I observed her closely, resisting the urge to intervene directly. My role wasn't to rescue her, it was to allow the natural consequences of her actions to unfold. Each phone call she made to the bank, each form she completed, and each acknowledgement she gave reinforced the lesson she had ignored for too long. Actions have consequences, and trust, once broken, must be earned back. Even among family and friends, whispers of accountability began to spread. Mutual acquaintances who had seen her previous patterns noticed a change. She began acknowledging her mistakes, taking steps to rectify them, and most importantly, understanding the weight of her choices. By the end of this period, it was clear that the turning point had been reached. Lauren had faced the reality of her actions in a way she could no longer avoid or manipulate. Fear and regret had replaced denial, setting the stage for genuine accountability and growth. The moment marked a profound shift, from denial to responsibility, from manipulation to acknowledgement, and from reckless entitlement to the first steps toward restitution. The stage was now set for the resolution, where consequences would meet action and real change would begin to take hold in both our lives. Once the turning point had passed, the focus shifted to resolving the chaos Lauren had created. I realized that this wasn't about punishment, it was about restoring balance, protecting myself, and ensuring she understood the consequences of her actions fully. The first step was making sure the banks had all the correct information to hold her accountable rather than me. I submitted updated documentation, identity theft forms, and proof of her fraudulent activity. It was meticulous work, but absolutely necessary. Lauren was initially resistant. She tried to downplay her actions, claiming she would find a way to settle things quietly, hoping to avoid public acknowledgement or legal consequences. I refused to enable that. Letting the banks handle it was the only way to enforce responsibility. She had used my trust, and now she had to face the tangible results of those choices. As the bank began formal proceedings, Lauren's fear became tangible. She realized that every document she had signed, every application she had falsified, had consequences beyond her control. Calls from the bank became routine, and she started complying fully with requests for repayment schedules, verification, and documentation. This forced her to confront the reality she had avoided for months. At the same time, I focused on repairing my own life. My credit score was stabilizing, and I took extra steps to protect my financial future, changing passwords, freezing unused accounts, and monitoring credit reports daily. I wanted to ensure that the resolution wasn't just about her accountability, but also about my own long-term security. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control returning. Even our interactions as siblings began to shift. While the tension remained, there was a mutual understanding. Actions have consequences, and accountability is non-negotiable. This was the first step toward a resolution that would ensure trust could potentially be rebuilt, but only on a foundation of honesty and responsibility. As the bank proceedings continued, Lauren began to grasp the magnitude of her choices. She was no longer able to deny the truth or rely on my intervention. Each official notice, each repayment plan, and each conversation with the bank reinforced the reality that she alone was responsible for the mess she had created. The fear and frustration she had initially felt gradually gave way to understanding. Finally, the lesson was sinking in. During this time, I maintained a careful balance. I stayed firm in my boundaries, refusing to provide financial support or excuses, while also offering guidance on navigating the process responsibly. I explained what she needed to do to communicate with the bank, keep accurate records, and comply with repayment schedules. This wasn't about leniency, it was about creating a path forward that allowed her to take ownership of her actions. Our family dynamic slowly began to stabilize. Friends and relatives noticed a change in her demeanor. She was no longer trying to manipulate or deflect blame. She began acknowledging her mistakes openly, sometimes apologizing directly to me, though I made it clear that apologies alone couldn't undo the damage. Trust had to be rebuilt gradually, and actions, not words, would determine the outcome. Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming my sense of security and peace. I reinforced protections on my credit and finances, knowing that this experience had taught me invaluable lessons about vigilance and boundaries. At work, I was more focused than ever, using the energy from the conflict to drive my projects forward. By the end of this phase, Lauren had taken concrete steps to address the consequences of her choices. Repayment plans were in place, and the threat of legal action had motivated her to take full responsibility. The resolution was unfolding, not as instant justice, but as a structured process in which accountability, restitution, and personal growth were intertwined. The final phase of resolution brought clarity and a sense of closure. Lauren had fully engaged with the repayment process, communicating directly with the banks and following every required step. The initial panic had transformed into focused responsibility. She was beginning to see the consequences of her choices not as abstract threats, but as tangible outcomes she had created through her own actions. Over time, her attitude shifted. She admitted to friends and family what she had done, took accountability for the financial strain she had caused, and demonstrated genuine effort to rectify the situation. While trust could not be instantly restored, her consistent actions started to rebuild the foundation that had been broken. Every payment, every acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and every lesson she internalized became a small step toward genuine accountability. For me, the resolution was twofold. First, my finances and credit were fully protected, with safeguards in place to prevent any future misuse of my identity. Second, I felt a sense of empowerment and confidence that I handled the betrayal with a combination of patience, strategy, and firmness. I hadn't acted out of spite, but out of a commitment to justice, fairness, and personal boundaries. By the end, the relationship with my sister transformed. It was no longer based on blind trust or entitlement, but on earned respect, accountability, and a clear understanding of limits. The crisis had forced both of us to grow, her in responsibility, me in assertiveness. The resolution left us with lessons far beyond money, that trust must be guarded, that accountability is unavoidable, and that boundaries are essential for relationships to survive even the deepest betrayals. Looking back on the entire ordeal, the lessons were clear and hard-earned. Betrayal, especially from someone as close as a sibling, cuts deeper than any financial loss. It's not just about money, it's about trust, respect, and the boundaries we set to protect ourselves. Lauren's actions force me to confront the reality that even those we love can make choices that threaten our well-being, and that forgiveness doesn't mean ignoring accountability. This experience reinforced the importance of vigilance. I realized that trust must be earned and boundaries must be respected. Protecting my finances and my personal space wasn't about being cold or punitive. It was about ensuring my life and hard work weren't exploited. The bank's legal processes and structured steps became tools not of revenge, but of fairness. By allowing external systems to enforce consequences, I ensured accountability without resorting to personal hostility. Moreover, the situation transformed our relationship. While the bond between siblings was tested, it eventually gained a foundation based on honesty, responsibility, and mutual respect. Lauren began to internalize the lessons she had avoided for so long. She understood the impact of her decisions and began actively making amends. This resolution didn't happen overnight, but it highlighted that true growth often arises from discomfort, mistakes, and the necessity of facing consequences. The final outcome proved that accountability, when combined with clear boundaries and patience, can lead to meaningful change. Lauren learned that actions have real consequences, and that relying on others to cover mistakes only prolongs the inevitable. For me, the experience reinforced my importance of self-respect, assertiveness, and the courage to take decisive action, even when it feels uncomfortable with family involved. In the end, our relationship found a new balance. While trust would take time to fully restore, there was now a shared understanding of responsibility, respect, and honesty. I no longer feared being taken advantage of, and Lauren had begun to accept that her choices directly shaped her outcomes. This journey wasn't about punishment, it was about teaching accountability, fostering personal growth, and establishing boundaries that would prevent future betrayal. Most importantly, this experience became a lesson not just for us, but for anyone watching or hearing our story. Family ties are precious, but they cannot justify exploitation. Protecting oneself is not selfish, it is necessary. Trust must be measured and accountability must be enforced. When someone oversteps, consequences are not only fair, they are essential for growth, learning, and the survival of healthy relationships. Through the challenge, the betrayal, and the eventual resolution, we emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Respect, responsibility, and boundaries had been reclaimed, and the lessons learned will guide both of us in every future decision.